Coming up today on Seahawks Forever, an up-close look at the nose tackle position on that Seahawks defense. It seems to be a huge concern, pun intended, among many of you, maybe even most of you. A lot of you have told me that you think it's the one aspect of the roster that still needs work. But does it? The team may not think so. We'll take a look today, up close at the nose tackle position on this Mike Macdonald defense, coming up today on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dan. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. And the best way to support the channel, if you like what I do, hit that thumbs up button for the video. Subscribe to the channel. Only about half of you are currently subscribed, even those of you who watch on a regular basis. Yeah, I see the analytics. I see ya. And if you want to be notified of new material anytime I post, which is pretty much every day, as I am a full-time content creator, hit that bell button for those notifications. If you'd like to support me and or the show, all the ways you can do that are linked down below in the description. All right, let's get into this. No real news to report, although relative to today, Jonathan Hankins, that signing becoming official in the last 24 hours or so. Still waiting on the Shaquille Griffin news. When and if he signs it sounds like he will. There was a Jeremy Fowler report yesterday that they are working towards that end to bring the former third-round draft pick back to Seattle for some cornerback depth. Some of you have some issues with that, but when that becomes official, we'll talk more about that. But the one position that a lot of you are wringing your hands about coming out of the draft that wasn't addressed in the draft or thereafter or since, other than bringing Jonathan Hankins back, is that nose tackle spot. It seems to be a real source of stress for many of you. And I've talked about it too. I wanted them, going into the draft, most of the mock drafts I did, when I talked about mock draft process and concept and the way I wanted the team to approach it is I was hoping they would draft two defensive linemen. One kind of inside-out guy, which they did, in Riley Mills out of Notre Dame. Love his upside, although he might not be ready to go week one because of that knee injury. And then I did want a true nose tackle, more of an interior guy, which is why I mocked Kenneth Grant to the Seahawks a lot in the first round leading up to the draft, hoping that he'd be there at 18 and that we could go back and get that starting guard in the second round. As it turns out, Grant went 12 or 13 to Miami, I think, which was higher than he was generally projected. But the Seahawks, it sounds now, from everything we've heard, that Zabel really was the target, and he was the guy at the top of their board. And I think they would have taken him over Grant, even if Grant was available there. But there were some other guys. Derek Harmon went to the Steelers shortly thereafter. Jamari Caldwell, some guys later on in the draft, Alfred Collins, who ended up going to the San Francisco 49ers. But the more I look at this, and I actually dove into this and started doing all the work on it, thinking I was going to come up with a different conclusion, which was that they need to go get another body. And I've got some names here. We'll take a look at what might be available on the free agent market, maybe some potential veteran cuts coming up or trade targets, kind of minor trade targets, just in case they should feel the need later on. But I ended up in my journey to put this show together convincing myself that I think they're okay. And so I'm going to present that here to you now. First of all, let's take a look at what they have. Let's take a look at the current roster. And it's kind of interesting because some teams list guys at different positions than we think they should be listed at. But these are the guys on the roster today that can play nose tackle. Jarran Reed, of course, just signed to a new 3-year contract. He'll finish his career, most likely, here in Seattle on his second go-round. Jonathan Hankins, bringing him back. By most accounts, most feel he didn't play his best last year, not up to the standard that we're used to, but the team must feel good enough about him to bring him back. Brandon Peely, who's just 26 years old still, spent most of the last season on the practice squad, as did Quinton Bohanna, who has connections to Aden Dirty from his time as the defensive line coach in Dallas. And then they added a couple of undrafted free agents that they list as nose tackles, D'Amico Rowland and J.R. Singleton, even though neither of those guys are that archetype that you're looking for. Neither of them are that 330 plus pound, beef in the middle. And as I mentioned, the way that they list these guys, Reed is listed as a nose tackle, for example, but Jonathan Hankins is listed as a defensive tackle. Kind of interesting, right? But I think the depth there might be a little bit better than we think. Brandon Peely was a guy that played 12 games in Miami the last 2 years, 6'3", 319 pounds. He's a guy that they've brought back a couple of times now. So they obviously like what they see there. And then you have your kind of hybrid guys too that can move inside and out. I mean, Leonard Williams can line up over the center at 310 pounds and 6'5", even though, none of us think of him as a nose tackle, but he can play there. Mike Morris, if he takes a step forward this year, we get anything out of him. He's a guy that they drafted for that role. He can play inside and out. He can get down in a 4-point stance and play. Maybe he's not a true zero technique, but he can play it if need be at 6'6", 295 pounds, or whatever he shows up at this year. He seems to be one of those guys that kind of morphs from year to year, depending on what they're looking for from him. So maybe they've asked him to add some more weight so they can play him inside a little bit more too. And then Mills, even at 6'5", 290, is a guy that can play on all fours and also stand up on the edge too. I asked myself why this is such a concern among so many fans. And I think it might just be because, and this is the case at every position really, we want at least one dude at every spot that we can dream on, right? And there just isn't that young, true stereotype of a nose tackle in the middle that has upside. That Tavondre Sweat type of guy. Or maybe this year it was Alfred Collins, or it would have been Kenneth Grant if things had gone a different way in the draft. Maybe Miami takes Gray Zabel and he's not on the board instead of Kenneth Grant, which a lot of mock drafts in the days leading up to the draft had them doing. There was a lot of buzz that Miami really liked Zabel. If things had been flipped there, maybe Grant's at the top of the Seahawks board, and then none of you were stressing out about this at all. But I'll say two things about that. Number one, those guys are really rare. And number two, do we really need it? Is it necessary? I'll get into that in a second. Actually, let's address that first. And we'll flip those around. And then we'll talk about how rare they are and how that related to this year's draft. So sometimes perception doesn't match reality. We think of Jarran Reed as a guy that can play nose tackle and has played a lot of nose tackle. But in 2024, 678 snaps, only 18 of them came at nose tackle. That's less than 3%. Byron Murphy, who I count myself among those of you who have worried that if they don't add enough to that position, that he'll have to play too much nose tackle, and that kind of takes away from what he can really do the best and might prevent him from being unlocked this year, playing more 3 technique, being able to get upfield and penetrate, get after the quarterback a little bit. He only played 14% of his snaps last year at the nose tackle spot, 66 out of 456 snaps. Even Jonathan Hankins, who we do think of as the archetype, that big 335-pound dude, like, it's okay that his PFF grades weren't as high last year. They never really have been. PFF isn't really kind to the nose tackle position unless you can get to the quarterback. So there was this thought that he didn't play as well last year. But he's a big body. He can get in the middle. He can eat up some blocks. He only played 31% of his snaps at nose tackle. And so he was moving around a little bit too. And so, and I've said this before, but I kind of came up with this as we were leading up to the draft. Do they need more nose tackles, or do they just need guys that can do nose tackle things when they're needed? Now, some of you have come to me and said, well, wait a minute. Mike McDonald does need a stud nose tackle because he had one in Baltimore. he had Michael Pierce. And Michael Pierce he's 33 years old now, but he's that 330 plus pound guy, big gap eater, right? 2023, last season he played for Mike Macdonald as the defensive coordinator in Baltimore. He was 31 years old at the time. He played 55% of the snaps. That's quite a bit. Just for reference, Hankins played 34% of the snaps last year. He played 696 total snaps. Only 146 of those were as a nose tackle. 21%. That's less than Hankins did. Interesting, right? They even moved him around. It's a very specialized, part-time, narrow-focused role. It's important, but it's not crucial to have that stereotype, that archetype in the middle. And if you still disagree with everything I've said in these first 12, 13 minutes of the show, well, the team is telling you that too. Because they didn't aggressively go out and acquire one, and they could have. Told you I'd circle back and mention how it related to this year's draft. The last 4 or 5 years, big defensive tackles, guys that look like nose tackles, were really, really rare in these last few drafts. This year, not so much. A lot more 320, 330 plus pound guys than we've seen in a long time. They could have had one at any point in the draft. When they took Riley Mills in the 5th round, who they might not even get a half season out of as a rookie. Might be a redshirt year for him. But he's more, again, of a hybrid, stand-up edge guy that could play some inside. They could have had Jordan Phillips out of Maryland. He was picked 1 pick after Mills went to Miami. They could have had Wyatt Black out of Iowa, who epitomizes that big frame, massive wingspan, 340-pounder, really hard to move. Saw him at the Senior Bowl. He went later in the 5th round to Pittsburgh. Alabama's Tim Smith. They could have had him in the 6th round. But they made other choices. Then in undrafted free agency, some of those guys went undrafted because they're one-trick ponies. And so they tend to fall through sometimes. Think Poona Ford, even though part of the reason he went undrafted is because he didn't really measure up height and weight-wise to what teams are looking for. And yet, here he is, 8 years later, still in the league. But guys like Georgia's Nazir Stackhouse, who I know a lot of you guys wanted, he went undrafted. Elijah Simmons out of Tennessee, 335 pounds. He went undrafted. Desmond Watson, of course, the 450-pounder from Florida. He went to the Bucs. Stackhouse went to the Packers. Simmons went to Arizona. And you would think the Seahawks would have been positioned well to recruit those guys and give them, hindsight being 2020, they could have given him the guaranteed money that they gave Jackson Woodard before they cut him after 2 days, because these guys and their agents would have looked at the Seahawks roster and said, there's an opportunity there. That's a good spot for you. You have a chance to make the roster. They invited Thor Griffith from Louisville to their rookie minicamp over the weekend. He kind of fits that mold, 6'2", 320 pounds, although Corbin Smith said he didn't, based on what he saw at minicamp, and it's hard to tell, of course, there's no pads or anything, but he didn't really stand out. So they haven't signed him. If the Seahawks felt there was a pressing need to add a guy like many of you think they need to, they could have and would have done it. And they didn't. But promised you that we would look beyond that. If there is a need, they get to camp and they just don't like what they have, or some of these guys get hurt because these guys, they're just carrying that much weight. They seem to get banged up a lot. Cameron Young's a great example. They had to release him this offseason, and he was a guy that we thought would play that role. He just can never really stay healthy. So you look at free agency. Are there any guys out there? Free agency's been picked pretty clean. Probably the best guy out there is John Jenkins, 6'3", 360 pounds. Actually played quite a bit for the Raiders last year, especially after Christian Wilkins went down. Played 54% of the snaps for them. That was a career high. He's played 150 games in the league, 319 tackles, but he's 36 years old at this point. He makes Hankins look like a rookie. Jordan Phillips played in Buffalo last year, 6'6", 334, 116 games in his career, 221 tackles. But he only played 9 games for the Bills last year, and they had issues up front on defense. That's why they went heavy, kind of like the Niners did in this year's draft on the defensive line, and he couldn't even crack the lineup. In fact, he was a healthy scratch at times last year. And then just, searching for names, guys that stand out that at one point looked like they had a lot of upside. Raekwon Davis is a guy that's still just 27 years old, kind of a Calais Campbell type of build, 6'7", 325. Not a true nose tackle, but another guy that can get in there and play that for you. Second rounder to Miami in 2020, started 41 games his first 3 seasons, but only 7 in the last 2. And that's because there are some health issues there. He actually was released by the Indianapolis Colts a couple of months ago with a non-football injury designation. He's got some blood pressure issues. He's got some decisions to make just about, can he keep playing football? So you can see kind of how bare the cupboard is. If they just need another depth piece, and this might be where a guy that can play inside or outside makes sense, because Mills isn't going to be ready, because DeMarcus Lawrence is coming off an injury-filled year, because Uchenna Nwosu is coming off 2 injury-filled years. Maybe you pick up another guy that can kind of play a little bit inside and out and help you out there so that guys like Reed can play more nose tackle. How about bringing Quinton Jefferson back? That might be an idea. We all love to bring our former Seahawks back, right? And he's done that. He's played inside and out, but it just kind of looks like his best days are behind him. He's played in, he had his 2 stints in Seattle after being drafted by them back in, what was that, 2017? It was the same year that Jaron Reed was drafted. Spent 4 years in Seattle, left, came back, played 2022, played well, always did. But 3 teams the last 3 years. Last year in Buffalo, he was a healthy scratch for 5 games. He just didn't give them much. And again, just like with Jordan Phillips, that was a team that was pretty desperate for defensive line help, and he couldn't get in there, couldn't crack the rotation. So I think Jefferson's best days are probably behind him, at least to the point that he wouldn't provide an upgrade over anything that's currently on the roster. And then there's a lot of talk about Jadeveon Clowney. Certainly he doesn't fit the nose tackle mold. But he's a guy that we know. He played really, really well for Mike McDonald a couple of years ago, kind of revived his career there with 9.5 sacks, turned that into a multi-year contract with the Titans. They tried to trade him. They just released him 2 days ago. Kind of sounds like the momentum might be that he ends up going back to the Ravens. If the Seahawks hadn't signed DeMarcus Lawrence, I would advocate for signing him. But as I mentioned in a short yesterday or the day before, like he and DeMarcus Lawrence are kind of the same guy. Like they've had their big pass rush years, and they were kind of known for that. But then quietly over time, they built their reputation as edge setters and run stuffers. And that's what they're really, really elite at. But also you put together age and role and history. Seahawks have already signed Jadeveon Clowney, and his name's DeMarcus Lawrence. So it just makes no sense to me on this roster. Just doesn't fit the nose tackle narrative. But I just wanted to mention that here because I didn't really give it any time in a full episode. Potential veteran cuts or trades. I was just kind of looking around depth charts around the league. Some people have mentioned maybe Mazzie Smith from Dallas. He's been a disappointment there after being their first round pick a couple of years ago out of Michigan. He was a guy that we all liked coming out of Michigan that year because we've been looking for nose tackles for a while. Played for Ad and Dirty, of course, but he's currently listed as their starting nose tackle. And I think if they were out on him and looking to move him, I think that would have happened prior to the draft, especially given the tackles that were available in this year's class. There is one logjam that's interesting in New Orleans. They actually have 4 veteran nose tackles. Devon Godchaux, Christian Boyd, Kalen Saunders, John Ridgeway. Ridgeway's always a guy that's been interesting to me. Still just 26 years old. He's bounced around quite a bit. He was originally a 5th rounder in Dallas, made the 53, and then they released him in September, so Dirty would have some connection with him. Just big, strong guy. I've always kind of thought there was something there, but he's just never been able to stick. He's had some trouble staying healthy too. He's been in Washington and New Orleans since. He just hasn't really done much. So maybe they have a logjam there and they release a guy but that would probably be something that happens in training camp. at which point, on the cut to 53, there might be some opportunities there in what I now call the final phase of free agency. Like, you just have that one cut now. Remember, they don't have the progressive cut downs. And so there's just that big group of veteran players that become available. And I think that's important to note, because I think in summing this up, they clearly like what they have and feel like it's enough for them to succeed with that defense. Otherwise, as I said, they would have drafted a different guy, or they would have been more aggressive about signing one of those undrafted free agents. But it's something they'll continue to monitor, certainly. If some of those young guys don't step up, or if one of the older guys gets hurt, they do kind of have a lot riding on Hankins. Like, he played 17 games last year. He just didn't play as well as his reputation would have suggested. If they kind of get one last good year out of him, they'll probably be okay. But if he gets nicked up, because I don't think they want to play Murphy at nose tackle, even, what was that number again? And now I can't find it in my notes. 14% of the snaps. I kind of think they'd like that to be 0. I think we'd like that to be 0, so maybe I'm just projecting. But making a move at this point only makes sense if there's an impact guy that becomes available, like a difference maker. And I just don't see that, because those guys are hard to find, and teams that have them are going to hang on to them. The Christian Wilkins of the world, teams only let those guys move on when they just become too expensive. And this just isn't the time of year for that to be happening, right? Maybe in a year, maybe we're having a different discussion. Jaron Reed's a year older. And again, he didn't even play nose tackle last year. Hankins probably isn't in the picture next year. It could end up being that we're sitting here 10 months from now talking about nose tackle or interior defensive tackle certainly being a big draft need, maybe being the primary need. If that offensive line takes a big step forward this year, and they've taken a quarterback that they think could be their quarterback of the future, and they're young in that room anyway, some of those things that we might have thought 2026 were going to be geared towards coming up to the draft, they can really, we talked about this right after the draft this year, they can really enter into 2026 potentially and just take best player available. And the biggest need might be interior defensive line. And often the first round is the best time to get those guys. Maybe a guy like Clemson's Peter Woods. Or if they're left having to go to the free agent market next year and sign a veteran that fits that mold, that's big, 330, 340 pounds, that can play that 0 technique, 1 technique, that has connections to the coaching staff, due to be unrestricted free agents in 2026, Travis Jones and Michael Pierce of the Baltimore Ravens. So that's where things stand. Do you feel any better about it or worse after this? What are your thoughts on the nose tackle position? Is there a name I didn't mention that you think is out there or might be attainable? I can already predict. I have one very loyal Twitter follower and viewer who loves to come up with crazy big name trade ideas that are not realistic under any circumstances. I suspect I'll be getting maybe some offers presented from him that'll sound kind of crazy. But what do you think? Is there a guy out there that you have your eye on that maybe the Seahawks would be able to get, that would be attainable, that would fit into this group? Until tomorrow, and I think the plan at this point is to do a live stream tomorrow night. Haven't done that since the draft. It's been a couple weeks with the move and everything else. And I will be joined by a special guest. Just got to lock that down. So keep your eye on Twitter at Seahawks Forever and subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell so you get notified. That way, when I do go live, you'll know, and you can get in there and you can join the conversation, and we can engage about this and talk about we're going to talk about the status overall of the roster and the depth chart. That will be the focus of the live stream tomorrow. If you want to support the show, that's all down in the description, linked down there as well. Thanks again, you guys. Appreciate you watching and listening. If you listen on audio, also make sure to subscribe or follow, depending on which platform you use, so that you know whenever there's a new episode. and you can listen there. Thanks again. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching.